Sefer Bereshit is about Tzelem Elokim. Sefer Bereshit is about the fact that every single human being is unique. Every single human being is endowed with the Tzelem Elokim, in the image of God. Every human being has infinite value. So if every human being has infinite value and you pass them in the hallway and you don't notice them, or you don't know who they are, then we are being negligent if that's what's happening in our homes or in our schools.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. An almost insidious problem that affects so many kids is being under the radar. That is, they're generally ignored in school, camp, or other social settings by the teachers or group leaders because they're doing fine, and I use that word advisedly. He or she is not the class genius, not the kid who asks questions, not the troublemaker, not the class clown. I'm talking about kids who likely have so much more to offer, but are never given the opportunity because the people who should inspire them don't give them much attention, because other kids are, so to speak, sucking all the air out of the room. Sometimes it's a matter of a teacher's not knowing that a student has a talent or interest that matters to him, or that student herself doesn't know what she's capable of doing. Maybe this kid is a late bloomer, and a bit of encouragement would help some amazing abilities emerge. Perhaps the child is good at things that are not emphasized in school, like a perfectly normal kid who doesn't like Gemara, and accordingly is ignored when the natural Gemara learners get the entirety of the teacher's attention, but that student is good at other things. And some kids feel safe and comfortable without attracting extra attention, and maybe giving them extra attention might be exactly what they don't want. No matter the reason, this is a problem that's difficult to diagnose, but can have long-term negative effects. What a shame it is when our children can give so much, but don't realize it themselves because few people recognize that there's more to them than meets the eye. And yet there always is. On Saturday night, December 14th, I was honored to host a live podcast panel discussion at Congregation Shomrei Torah in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, to discuss Children Under the Radar, Strategies for Noticing and Maximizing Varied Strengths and Abilities. It was sponsored by Larry and Nancy Bravman and was part of their wonderful Inspired by Ilona organization. You can learn more about it by going to inspiredbyilona.com. The link is in the description of this podcast. The panel consisted of Rabbi Benny Krause, Dr. Razel Yaish, and Howard Blass. We'll get to the live podcast recording in just a moment. First, remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, in 2024, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast. And JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Before beginning the conversation, I want to read part of what Nancy Bravman said before the panel discussion began. I want to thank you all for attending our 5th event in the Inspired by Ilona educational series entitled Children Under the Radar, Strategies for Noticing and Maximizing Varied Strengths and Abilities. In prior series, we addressed issues including embracing and supporting people with disabilities, children who are out of the box, the LGBTQ community, and people with varying religious practices. Based on the responses we received in marketing this event, the topic seems to have hit a chord with many who have children or personally identify with the feeling of being unappreciated or disregarded. I feel confident that tonight's distinguished panel will leave you with guidance on how to begin working to remedy this challenge in your community. We are incredibly fortunate to have such a knowledgeable and dynamic panel gathered tonight. Each of you provides a different area of expertise that will guide parents, educators, and community leaders on how to empower children whose talents can easily go unnoticed. We are thrilled that you are joining us this evening and can't wait to be enlightened by your words of wisdom. Larry and I created Inspired by Ilona as a dedication to our beloved daughter, Ilona Bravman. Despite her diagnosis of spinal muscular atrophy, She lived an inspiring and meaningful life until age 28. Ilona taught us and everyone she encountered about recognizing strengths that aren't apparent. Due to her disability, Ilona could only speak with the help of an assistive device and only had an up and down movement with one hand. None of her abilities were readily visible. But with the support of many insightful professionals, family members, and friends, Ilona's intelligence and spirit shone through, allowing her to be part of a dance program and attend college. Due to the support of people who truly saw who she was, Ilona had a secure sense of self, thrived, and served as a role model to many. What we learned from Ilona is to look way beyond the surface and to cherish and embrace untapped areas of potential. And now I'm pleased to present our live podcast event.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight in this special panel inspired by Ilona. And exactly as Nancy said, the idea that people who have untapped areas of potential that aren't seen by too many people but are there and need to be discovered, that is what our goal is tonight, to try to find out ways of discovering the way we can bring out those superpowers that so many kids and others have, and it's not noticed. And the reason it's not noticed is not because there's necessarily any sort of learning difficulty or anything else, simply because, as I've told people in discussing this panel in advance, these kids are doing fine. They're doing fine. I've had lots of kids of my own in school who did fine. And fine is fine, but the problem is sometimes it goes unnoticed. Sometimes the kids who are disruptive, sometimes the kids who are the class genius, sometimes the kids who ask every single question, they go noticed, and the other kids just sit there, and there's no reason for the teacher to pay particular attention to them, or the counselor, or the group leader, or the madrich. And we have to find ways to bring them in, because even though they are doing fine, there's so much more they could be if someone would find out and discover that untapped potential. So it's an honor tonight to introduce our panel of experts to discuss this particular issue. Maybe the biggest group of kids that there are out there who are untapped, because we don't even notice that there's a problem in the first place. Rabbi Benjamin Krause is the principal of SAR Academy since 2005 and leads a diverse community of over 1,000 students and 250 staff members. His leadership has ensured both educational excellence and operational efficiency. Prior to his work at SAR, he held the position of vice president at the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation, where he established schools and educational programs for Jewish students in Eastern and Central Europe. Dr. Rezel Yaish is a clinical psychologist at Ma'ayanot Yeshiva High School for Girls. She has worked with teens and special health needs populations of all ages for many years as head counselor at both Camp Hask and Camp Simcha. Howard Blast serves as senior advisor, National Ramah Tikva Network for the Ramah Camping Movement. He's worked for over 40 years in various positions throughout the Ramah Disabilities Inclusion Network of camps. He's a social worker and special education teacher by training and teaches Jewish studies and bar bat mitzvah to students with a range of disabilities and special circumstances. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I just gave a broad overview of what we're talking about, but I'd like to ask each of you, very briefly, just for 2 minutes, to define what you think we're talking about. When we discuss kids who are under the radar tonight, what kind of kid do you think we're referring to? Rabbi Krause, why don't we start with you?
Shavua Tov. First, thank you for including me. It's very meaningful to me on many levels to be here and to be discussing this topic and with you tonight and in Ilona's memory. And what a meaningful way to remember someone and to continue to honor her and what she brought to your world and to this world. So thank you for including me in that. We are pretty close to the holiday of Hanukkah. If I could use my midrashic license to try to frame it for a second. There's not that much in the Gemara about Hanukkah, but one of the few things that the Gemara mentions is in Masechet Shabbat, where it's discussed, Ner Hanukkah sheinicha lamala me'esrim amma psula, that if you put the Hanukkah candles more than 20 amot high, it's pasul. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah. The Gemara says, why not? Delo shalti ba'ina, because people don't see it. Most of the time, the mitzvah is to do something. You did it. God knows, and it's between you and Him, and you fulfilled the mitzvah. But something as meaningful as Hanukkah candles, and something where the entire purpose of the Hanukkah candles are to be seen. And you can imagine somebody takes that mitzvah and puts it somewhere where it's not seen and it's not noticed, then the Gemara says that doesn't work. And that, I think, is a powerful framework for what we're talking about tonight. this is not just about kids. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to know, needs to know that they matter. There aren't that many mitzvot in Sefer Breshit, but Sefer Breshit is about Tzelem Elokim. Sefer Breshit is about the fact that every single human being is unique. Every single human being is endowed with the Tzelem Elokim, in the image of God. Every human being has infinite value. So if every human being has infinite value and you pass them in the hallway and you don't notice them, or you don't know who they are, then we are being negligent if that's what's happening in our homes or in our schools. So to me, right, the first thing they have to do is you have to have a conversation. To put something on, if kids are under the radar, then you have a conversation about it, and then there's a radar to talk about and to think about. So to me, it's about really raising consciousness, and in every institution, in every place that we are, it's about creating a culture and a consciousness of this. That's probably the most important thing. We'll talk about some of the specifics, but I think the most important thing is just reinforcing it. We all know it. We all know that it's important to matter, but we sometimes, especially as our organizations get bigger, sometimes we forget it if it's not reinforced.
Dr. Yaish, who do you think we're talking about tonight?
Okay, I've been interviewing a number of people, sort of off the cuff, both in aiming to spread word about this event, but really to pick people's brains. When they hear the term children under the radar, who are they thinking of? And the answers are really different. So curious what everyone in the audience thinks they're coming to hear tonight. But what I was thinking about and what keeps coming to mind, even look at the nature of this session, we're using words, we're using verbal communication, which is probably the human gift that we have, that we can use words to talk. What if words are not the major way that a child is coming out to be heard? How do we notice a kid who isn't using words, who isn't coming up to talk, whether that's at home or at school? And I think that is sort of where we've all been trying different approaches, but for me, I'm thinking about the child who isn't using words, or words are not, verbal communication isn't their strong suit at the moment, so that is why they're walking through the halls, or they're walking through their camps, and people are not noticing them. They're fine, they're good, they're not misbehaving, they're not demanding too much from their school system or their camp system in any specific way, and yet we're not hearing from them in words. And inspired by Alona, who words were not the easiest in terms of verbal communication, it makes me think that's a clear way we don't notice someone, but when it's not as obvious, where do we look out for the student, the child who is not coming out with their words? That's what I'm thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Howard.
Okay, thanks. So I'm thinking about the two settings that I know best, students that I work with for Bar and Bat Mitzvah and people in overnight Jewish summer camps. And I'm thinking about students whose awesomeness and specialness is not readily apparent, but which is really just waiting to be discovered and unleashed. And because it's not obvious, and because it's not readily apparent, it might really require teachers and parents to be really good detectives and to really and be good observers to help uncover those strengths that they have.
I'd like to know in what ways is this problem manifest? What are some of the consequences? What are the ways that we see this, aside from the obvious fact that they don't get enough attention? What are the other ways that it is manifest that you can think of right now? Dr. Aish, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a son who's aiming to be one of the rare future educators of our generation, as there's maybe some worry that we won't have enough of those coming up. I tried to talk him out of it, but didn't succeed. And he said, I know the answer. It's so simple. As a young, naive, sort of like excited about Jewish education, it's like you just have to hire a ton more teachers. The more staff you have, someone will pick up on that kid. Someone will notice. And I sort of chuckled at his sort of easy answer. It's like, it's an easy answer. You just get more people in schools and someone will notice. So I think while that is possibly true, that if you stack the deck higher, or there are some schools even in this neighborhood where they hire teachers who aren't just teaching but are actually hired and paid to spend time connecting with kids and looking out and being curious about those awesome kids. But I think it is noticed in the school setting where I find much of my life nowadays. That's where I am, where we, the educators, are worrying about the fact that we don't know these kids. Does anyone know that kid? Like in a school where they're not known, then what's going wrong? How could we have missed that kid? So that's one area where it manifests for me.
Just in the last 2 weeks, I found out that I teach Gemara class, teach an 8th grade Gemara class. I found out very recently that there's a kid in my Gemara class who spends many, many hours a week auditioning for professional acting jobs. And I'm like, wow. He's been in my school for a long time. He's been in my class now for quite a while. And if my daughter didn't tip me off because she's in the 8th grade, I would that's remarkable. I mean, again, interesting, good, bad, shouldn't be moonlighting during school. We could talk about but I should know this, right? These are things that as far as I'm concerned, this is a kid who's in the second row of the class, and I haven't heard much from him, and he looks a little tired, and this is important information. Somebody else, this is not so representative, wakes up every Tuesday at 3 a.m. and does a round of golf somewhere between 5 and, I don't know where it's light at 5 o'clock, but I started talking to him about this, and I'm like, so you do this? He's like, yeah, I do this. And how meaningful is it to know what matters to the kids that we spend 40 hours a week with in school, and we think that their lives are defined by the things that happen in school, and they're not. And it makes all the difference. First of all, it matters to them that we know it, and it allows us to understand who we're dealing with.
I'd just like to add one point to that along with that before I hear from Howard about that, because one of the things that I get worried about is what you said, plus what about that kid who could be taking acting jobs or who could be golfing, but no one ever handed him a golf club, or no one ever told him, hey, I bet you'd be good at acting. And that kid might have that talent. He might have that superpower. He might be that awesome kid, but he doesn't even know it himself. So there's two different issues we're talking about here. I want to make that
knowing
clear.
Knowing them and
it's
fostering.
Knowing our kids so that you should know what makes them special, at least something that makes them special, and also helping them figure out themselves what makes themselves special.
100%. I think that is definitely part of this conversation, without question.
For me, it just comes to really having to be a good detective and really just look for those opportunities and create opportunities to find those strengths that kids have and those superpowers, as you said.
Let's talk about some negative consequences. Rabbi Krause, you just talked right now about not knowing that kid trying to go for acting jobs or golfing. Okay, so what? Meaning, okay, you didn't know about it. Why does that matter? Why should we care whether or not you know that much about the kid?
I spend a lot of time. We all do. Both of us do, for sure, in schools. I think that when schools take themselves a little bit too seriously, or they put themselves at the center of the world, then they're missing something. And I think that it's really important to know that, right, this has to do with a homeschool relationship, this has to do with maybe the school camp relationship as well, that there are many aspects to the life of a child. There are many aspects to the education of a child. Obviously, again, I think that if you're spending 40 hours a week in school for many years, and that's a big part of it. But it's just really important to know that, and as you said, I also think that you're right, to bring some of those things into school. To give kids, I think we do a decent job at the standard things. There are sports opportunities and things like that, and sometimes there might be acting opportunities or music opportunities, but maybe there's a broader range of opportunities out there that we should bring in our kids, so that, first of all, they can feel good, right? We believe this, if a kid doesn't wake up in the morning happy to come to school, there is zero chance that I'm going to teach him anything. If the kid walks into our school and basically feels good about himself or herself and is happy to be there, there's a higher probability that child will learn something. And if I could figure out a way to get them there, or to support them, or to make them feel good about themselves, about who they are because they're there, then I think that's going to impact what happens in our schools as well.
I have a thought. It's interesting that when Maya Note started the school that I work at, it wasn't even in the mission statement, which is hard to believe right now in 2024.
I know the founding principle.
Well, I have to talk about that in a moment. The founding principal was actually Rabbi Krause's mom, and was my principal of my high school. And she actually took the time to notice me, a good kid who did well in school and didn't demand a lot of attention. And how did she do that? Just throwing a few words my way, calling me into her office to ask my opinion about something, just meant so much to me. Why would you even think to call me into the office to ask my opinion about something? I'm not really known so much, but she wanted my opinion. So I was going to save it for later, but since you did that. But I will say that because I also spend a lot of my time in private practice, what I was saying before is that my Maya Note mission statement did not include anything about mental health and social wellness, mental and social wellness. It wasn't part of the mission statement over 20 years ago, which is hard to believe. Of course it is now. And the demand to have our kids be understood and be cared for from a mental health perspective has only increased. And every school nowadays is trying really hard to figure out how to do this and do it well. And I work in a clinical practice, so what I was thinking, the negative consequences, as I see those kids, and this is where the detective skills work. We'd like to believe if they're not doing well at school, at least they're doing well at home, right? That would be okay. At least somewhere they're known. And usually that is the case if you're blessed enough to feel known in your home environment. I might argue that that is the way more important place to feel known. But if you're not, I'll see those kids in my office. I used to be so happy when I wasn't in private practice. I'd say, yeah, you just send them to the outside professional. They'll take care of things. Now when I'm both the inside professional and the outside professional, you get to see the kids where they are suffering. Not everyone is, and we'll talk about that, where they are wondering, what's wrong with me? Why can't I figure out this code that everyone else has to get known? And that's where the negative consequences start to spill.
I mean, I'm just going back to the beginning of what you were talking about. And I was thinking that in preparing, I consulted the real experts, which were my own children. And I was thinking back on, my children are now in their 20s and 30s, but I was thinking, my kids went to Beit Rabban school in New York City when they were little. And I was thinking that I couldn't remember what they called this first period. It was called free explorations. And the teacher sort of, I don't want to say dumped all these different things on the ground, but they had opportunities. Kids could gravitate towards the class pet, or they could gravitate towards building blocks, they could gravitate towards drawing. And I was thinking that this was this perfect opportunity for the teachers to really kind of tune into what kids' strengths were and how to engage them. And then sort of, enter their world, as you were saying, to really figure out what it was that made them tick. Because I think what we keep talking about is that the kids who are either they get the most attention because they're the Gemara expert or because they're quote-unquote misbehaving, other areas aren't noticed. And I really think that's been a really kind of an important way in that teachers can really tune into those interests.
I'd like to go back to what Dr. Yaish said earlier, her son's suggestion. Why don't we just hire more teachers? And we realize in some ways that might be innocent and naive given the financial reality of Jewish education. But on the other hand, I mean, he's onto something that may be impossible, but that actually describes the problem in my mind. For example, when I used to teach, et chata'ai nimas kirayom, my own mistakes I can now admit, I remember thinking, not even consciously, but going through the kids in my class, okay, he's okay, fine, and he's okay, that one I gotta watch out for. It's almost inevitable because a teacher only has so many hours in the day and so much energy, emotional energy, physical energy to put into the kids. So how would we find a way to give teachers simply the tools to do it, or are we simply, there's nothing to do because there's just not enough time or energy for a teacher to do anything? Meaning, identifying a problem is one thing, but is it an unsolvable problem? Would you think so, Dr. Yaish, or not?
It's a hard problem, and I think that what I'm finding and I'm learning is one comfort here from speaking to people who felt under the radar as kids, sort of. They didn't actually expect much from their teachers. They're not mad at the adults in their life. Like I said, aren't you frustrated? Like, did you wonder every day why no adult is noticing me, is caring about me? So maybe that's because the people I'm asking lived in a time mostly where like they wouldn't even have expected the teacher to be doing that, right? That wasn't like you just taught me Chumash, I went home, you went home, we did math, all good. That was the day. But I think for me, what's been helping me and helping my teachers, and I balk against systems because I'm not a systems person. I like big ideas, big thoughts, big topics, exploring exciting things. And when someone says, Razel, do this every day at 2 o'clock, I'm like, I don't want to do that, But by making some systems, even with the amount of teachers that a school currently has, or using whatever resources that are around, and knowing, let's say, there is sort of it seems almost nothing, but a mandated check-in for every student, right, which is so part of almost every school nowadays. But it does help and makes a difference from the kid who had no check-in, right, and so there was nowhere to go.
So I was thinking, I just came back from the Foundation for Jewish Camp, had their big conference of Jewish camp professionals, 950 camp professionals in Chicago. And Julie Barron-Platt, who is, I think, the president of Jewish Federation of North America, she's a big philanthropist and leader, and she's 67. And she told this very compelling story of when she was a girl at Camp Ramah in Ojai, California. After being a girl growing up in Wichita, Kansas, she talked about what she remembers most is that time every night where her counselor, whose name she still remembered, would go bed to bed. I mean, these days you don't sit on a camper's bed. That's not best practice. But in those days, you would go to each camper's bed and sit on the bed and have a conversation with each camper about that person's day. And I think it's just kind of a nice model. I mean, how can we do that in school to really tune into each person? And it's going to look different for each kid. And I think that, I don't know, I guess I was thinking maybe we need to recalibrate. Maybe there shouldn't be any maybe the radar screen, we have this wrong idea about the radar screen. I mean, I think everybody, I feel everybody can be connected with, and it's on us. It's on the teachers to find that thing. And that thing is not always going to be Gemara. It's going to be something else, like you said.
I do think that you think about the finances of it and you think about the systems that we have. I think that's an important aspect. We try at SAR, we try to make sure it is a big school. You can have 100 kids in a grade, and when we talk about the school, when we market the school, we talk about the fact that, okay, these 100 kids or these 80 kids have a dedicated psychologist for a grade or for 2 grades. And those, I think, are things that schools can do and should do and do. I always hesitate whenever we do something like that. My concern is that it almost tells the teachers, okay, that's not your problem. Like, you deal with, and that's first of all, it's not necessary and it's wrong. And every time you add a special ed teacher to the classroom, and all of a sudden it's like, oh well, those are the other kids, and like, what are you talking about? This is called inclusion. Like, inclusion means that we're including a whole group of people, and you're part of the system. So that's a concern of mine, because I think it really should be culture-wide, but I obviously think if people are stretched, then they're not going to be able, or if you're teaching a lecture hall of 100 kids, then you're not going to be able to know them as well and find their talents and find connections. So I think it's a balance of both of those things.
Can I add one thing?
Please.
I think I do this interviews for Camp HASC as another leg of my life, so I cross the camp world. And I decided this year I'm going to do market research while I'm meeting all these amazing applicants to Camp HASC. And I asked the 12th grade girls I was interviewing, what is your absolute favorite thing about your school? And this is a cross-section of girls from all over the country, pretty much. A couple from Canada, a couple from Israel, but mostly the United States. And I've never had this answer before, like, it's such an extreme way. This goes to what you're saying. 98% of the people I interviewed said, in my school, you can talk to your teachers and administrators about anything. They did not say guidance counselors or psychologists. Note, interesting. So that means, what that tells me, is that the girls are thirsty for this. They want to be in a school where you could talk to your teachers about anything. So then I asked the follow-up question, which is, do you know, like, are the teachers told, like, that's what they do? And they're like, I don't know. They don't know how it's happening, but they know that it is happening, or they perceive that their schools are doing this. And what I think you're exactly right about that, and this is where lately I find as a guidance counselor I'm doing more of this, is helping teachers who are realizing that's what girls are thirsty for, but I really want to teach my math class and make sure they do really well in math. And yet they want to know they have a teacher that they connect with about anything, and I want them as a guidance counselor not to think it can only come from my office. So that's where I think, in addition to systems, we can really help give teachers language and realize it's not so scary, because as you said, if you can think a kid is coming to school or by Krause and they're basically happy, then we have a chance to do more. So what you first need to do, and this goes back to words, is build some kind of bucket full of feedback or connection with a student so they can feel happy enough that they can take in whatever else is going on in the school. And teachers can do that in many ways. Some of that is even just by being like a really exciting, interesting teacher, like bringing your whole self to your class. So you're interesting to your students. So you don't even have to do so much connecting. Some of the best teachers are just interesting, so it feeds your brain and think, I can be interesting. Like, that's my role model. They're interesting, they're different, they're proud.
I'd like to ask you all how we decide when something is a problem and when it's something which does not need to be solved. We're talking about the kids that are sometimes ignored. Sometimes there are kids who want to be ignored, and that's fine. And if you try to bring them out of their shell, that will take them out of a comfort zone. And perhaps that child wants to be introverted and doesn't mind. I don't mean being ignored, but the person is doing fine. He's listening in class, she's paying attention, but maybe it's not right to tell them and force them to do something and force them into a leadership position that they aren't ready for. How do you decide when you have to intervene and find out, wow, I really have to try and get that kid to come out of his shell, and to say, oh, I think that kid's actually pretty happy where he is? That's a really tough thing to decide. Do you have any thoughts about that, Dr. Krause?
Yes. I want to be very clear. I think I said this in one of our on the conversation that we had introducing the topic. We don't have traditional report cards. We have what's called anecdotals, which are basically annoying for teachers because they have to write a lot and they have to know the kids. But it's important because it's about the whole child. It's about, right, it's not just about a math skill, or right, the 185 on a test is very different from someone else's 85 on a test. So we try to make sure that's reflected in the conversations we're having about kids. And one of the things that we really frown upon is to say, and it's happened to my own kids. Hannah is my daughter, who's now in college and thank God doing well. We'd really love to hear from her more. She's really quiet, which is basically coming across as a critique. And there are two things that happen when we read that as parents. Number one, she's not that quiet. We have wonderful interactions. We've seen her interact, very healthy interactions. So maybe she's quiet in your class, so maybe there's something that you're not bringing out in her. Maybe the class is not, I don't know. Number two, why is that a critique? She's doing, right, if she understands the material, maybe she's not interested in raising her hand every second. Is that a problem? Is that something that she should lose? I don't know, whatever our grading systems are. So I don't think this is about quiet. I think it's about respecting kids, knowing kids, allowing kids to figure out who they are and to know that they are respected for who they are. And there are lots of different personalities. It's not about making every kid into a leader who doesn't want to be a leader, or putting them in, God forbid, in uncomfortable situations, but it is about recognizing them, respecting them, and allowing them to find themselves.
Howard?
Yeah, I was going to say this kind of the same thing. I don't think that introversion is a problem. It's just kind of a way of being. And I suspect that if you polled the audience and said how many people are introverts, at least half the people, if not more, would say that they are. And even it doesn't even correlate with only being sort of like software engineers, people who do sort of solitary things. I'm sure people who have very public-facing things are also introverts. So I don't think it really matters. I think we should still create these opportunities in our classes for these different styles to shine. Like that's what Rabbi Krause was saying, that someone's going to be, the class artist or the class PowerPoint maker or lyricist or, the fix-it person or the tech genius. And that's okay. We just need to create these opportunities for people to shine. But I don't think that, I think it makes it sound like being an introvert is like a bad thing. It's just kind of just a way of being.
Certainly, as an introvert myself, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think, however...
You have a podcast, and you're out there.
But truly, I think that the problem is to know the difference. Maybe this kid isn't an introvert. He's just not being paid attention to, and this kid actually wants to be left alone and doesn't want to... That's what I really referred to. That.
I think it's really tricky because it's actually also hard for the adults. I'll tell you 2 mistakes I made. One an old mistake and one a new mistake. So I figured I'd ask a friend who's really quiet in high school. I was in her class. She didn't say a word for the years of high school. She sat in the front right seat. She had one friend that they barely spoke. And I'm like, I'm going to ask her what her experience was like. Was it hard for you? What did you wish the adults would do for you? So I said, and I said it in a very delicate way because suddenly as I was asking, I realized I might be stepping on a problem. And I said, friend, I'm doing this podcast. I want to ask you what you thought as someone who I think was quieter in high school. And what do you think? What would you want people to know? And she said, I was quiet in high school? I don't think I was. And I was like, now high school worked for her probably because she was really smart. So she did really well. So she got a lot of positive feedback from teachers. And I backtracked. I was like, I must be like remembering it wrong. She didn't help me out at all. She didn't say, I could see why you thought that, maybe. And I think that also links to the fact that there's a current student in school who's in pain and quiet. She's in pain. And I I spoke to her and I said, I'm just kind of checking in with you, like, how are things? And she said, are you worried about me? I said, well, are you worried about you? She goes, no, I want to know if you're worried about me. And I was like, well, a little bit I am. And that hurt her because she was trying to own herself as a quiet person. And I stepped into that trap of the, like, I'd like to hear more from you. So it's a very touchy thing how you figure out which one is okay and which one isn't. Someone heard me talking to my other friend in the hallway of Ma'ayanot, the one who I thought was quiet. She said, come by my office later. I was quiet in high school, and I have a lot to say about it now. I own it. And even recently, I thought of I asked another person in a much different way now, and she said, you know what I hated in high school? I hated when teachers would say to me, something like, we'd like to hear more from you in class. I said, what, do you want me to be disgusting like the rest of the girls in class and like cut you off and be inappropriate? I'm doing the right thing. Also an understanding of herself. And I said, I know what that teacher was trying to ask. They were trying to say, are you okay? Like, is this okay? But she didn't hear it that way. So I think there is a differentiation, and the detective line is echoing in my brain, because that's really our job, to figure out where it's.
I'm really fascinated by that idea that the way we ask the question is so crucial in terms of making sure that the intent is clear and is not misunderstood. I think that's just an important point. In the Datsilumi schools in Israel, there's at least the ones that my kids go to, there's a very strong emphasis for the boys in Gemara. And my kids are perfectly normal, good kids, I would say, I hope, but they don't like Gemara. Let me rephrase that. My oldest son didn't like Gemara in high school, and he therefore was ignored throughout most of high school. He was a popular kid. It wasn't a problem. He managed fine. Now he does Daf Yomi. He's 26. He figured it out later on. But I wonder if there's a time, if there's an aspect of Jewish education in particular, which sometimes leads to that. So at least for some schools, which emphasize so much Talmud. And therefore, if you are a good Talmud student, you are, A, one of the smart ones, B, one of the good kids. That's really important. I've noticed that a lot, that sometimes if you're not a good student in Limudei Kodesh in general and Talmud in particular, sometimes through no fault of the kid, he's labeled as not as good a kid, almost as if it's a moral failing because he's not interested in Gemara. And he's just not interested in Gemara, so he's not as firm a kid, he's not a good a kid, and that's obviously not an educationally sound methodology, I would personally say. I'm wondering if you've noticed any particular problems from Jewish education that might exacerbate these problems, where kids who might be really great in something else, part of the problem is we have a very intense, serious Jewish curriculum, and whether it's Gemara or something else, if you're not interested in that, you say, let's find some other area to shine. But my kids' school, they're not going to have band practice. It's just not going to happen. There's no time. Howard, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think it's on us to create those other things that we value, but if that's the value of the school, then it's the wrong school, probably.
I agree, but sometimes you're limited by choices, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I just met a young man over Shabbos who said, I didn't realize you finished Israel already, that you're back from Israel. I thought you were still there. He's like, no, I completed Shana Bet. I said, how was your experience? And he said, well, yeshiva wasn't my favorite thing, but what the yeshiva did was they let me major in going to Shalva to do volunteering. And I thought that was such an interesting answer, the way he said that. And I said, really? They didn't mind? He goes, I think they minded. I don't think I was a success totally, from their perspective. But they let me make a schedule where I was allowed to go to Shalva every day. Shalva is a large special needs organization in Israel. And I was pretty impressed right away with this yeshiva, because he wasn't doing it off the radar. He wasn't, sneaking. He worked it out. And somehow they were able to do this. But that takes a lot of creativity, push and pull probably to get there. He didn't tell me exactly how that happened. But he was proud of himself to tell me this. I do think Jewish education, I said before, the power of the word, the power of reading, writing, talking, it's a huge value in our society, in every speaking human society. I'm raising 2 boys who have pretty severe dyslexia, and I was a kid who read my whole life. I don't even understand what it would be like not to be able to read. So Hashem threw me into a life where I quickly had to understand a different way. And I see how schools work. It's tough to be a kid who kind of can't, read and write the same way. And that may be exacerbated specifically because of our great value of Jewish text. So then you're sort of a little more lost, perhaps.
That Rosh Yeshiva may have done the same wonderful service that, like with Rabbi Khan's son, that he may come back to really take on Gemara study and enjoy it. After, now that once he finds his passion, which is helping kids with disabilities, he may find that studying Gemara could be really fun. That's wonderful.
I hope I'm not implicating my school in terms of our value of textual learning. I think that culturally, right? Kids in fifth grade or in eighth grade or in high school are right. There are going to be different avenues to being known and mattering. So it's not only, and I think that's part of this, and that in that way it's a good thing. Obviously, of course, we respect academics, we respect Torah learning, and those are very important. And there are other people that can shine in other ways, and those are people that are very much respected as parts of their own. Right, the kids make the decisions anyway, right? In terms of what matters, and that's important, and that I think happens naturally. And I think it's important for that to happen within the system as well.
So I'd like to throw a different possibility, even though I accept everything that has been said so far in terms of using my son simply as an example, which is that, or even the example Dr. Yeshu gave before about Shalva. And so I think on one level that's wonderful, but I also wonder, and I'm curious if anyone agrees or disagrees over here, and I don't want to get off our topic, but I think it's actually relevant. Sometimes they fall under the radar, not because they're not a good Talmud student, but because the topic isn't being taught in a way that they can relate to. In other words, it could be that could be a great Gemara student. The problem is you don't know how to teach Gemara. And for the kids who can swim naturally, the ones who don't fall under the radar, this teacher, he just wants to go and give his chidushim. He wants to go and give Rav Chaim Brisker. So the kids who naturally swim in that kind of world, they don't fall under the radar. The other kids are not kids who aren't good at Gemara, but we've already pigeonholed them as such. And instead the reality might be that if you actually taught it in a different kind of way and found a way that would make them interested, found a way that maybe could speak to them. Not even interesting, maybe just a better educational methodology. Maybe in that situation, they would actually be a good Gemara student. I think that's a different kind of falling under the radar that has to be addressed as well.
Right, so I think it comes to what I said earlier. If the teacher is watching the kids during free play and having conversations about sports and really bothering to get to know what makes this kid tick, then your example of the thing in the Gemara, you're talking about, you're using a basketball example, or you're using, an example from building, and it does become relevant, so maybe the kid would become more interested in Gemara.
There's a teacher in our school who said that he was early as a young teacher, he had a powerful movement where he watched at the end of the year of his powerful text-based class, where all the students took their notebooks and threw them in the garbage, everything that he had just taught them. Which is what people do. Kids love to throw their notebooks in the garbage at the end of the year. And he said suddenly it hit him, they could care less one bit about what he taught. It's what he felt at the moment. And it took him years. I right away heard the story and I said, no, not at all. They didn't care. They just wanted to clean their notebooks. Don't take it so seriously. They just wanted to empty their bag, that their mother is going to yell at them for bringing home all the notebooks.
I'm so happy that we teach with iPads.
There you go. And so what he took him years to realize, though, sort of like this, he said, if that's what they do, if they're going to throw out the notebooks, and he invested a lot in their notes and the text, then I have to change the way I teach because they're not going to remember my notes, clearly. They're going to have to remember something else. But he still wanted them to learn the info. So he became what he viewed as a more connected teacher, connecting. I had something else to say, but that story just I thought was an interesting point, and I would say he's still working on it, but he realizes that there's something more to it than just the way I teach this text, if they're really going to throw out the notebooks.
I'll just say that I interviewed somebody a few days ago named Olivia Friedman. She's a teacher in Miami now. She used to live in Chicago, and she told me and it was completely not about this topic, but it is related to this, that she said she was at a conference and she saw some well-known math teacher, and she said, how would you teach someone like me? I was an English major. I don't like math. What would you have told me to do? He said, if you had been in my math class, I would have asked you to write an essay. What is the life trajectory of a parabola? And she said, I would have been a math student all of a sudden. Finding different ways that people can relate to it can do that. I want to go to Howard now and ask about camps, because we've been talking largely about schools, and that's one area where this is manifest, but it's not the only area where it's manifest. And in particular, I wonder if a camp is a place where students or kids in general can find areas where they don't shine in school because they're not given the opportunity, and all of a sudden something can come out in a way where it doesn't otherwise. Has that been your experience?
Very much. I mean, the great thing about camp is you take the academic piece right off the table, and it doesn't really matter how you do math or how you read. So camp's a fantastic setting, and also I think that there are just so many opportunities to discover things that you might not have discovered. I'll give you an example. I have a daughter who, was a very good student, but she took Omanut in camp one summer. So she took art, and there happened to be a woman who did paper cutting on staff that summer. And my daughter came back from camp, and she asked us if we could buy her a knife, like an exact one of those cutting knives, and the pad, whatever to cut. And she proceeded to design this paper cut that became her bat mitzvah invitation. So creating these opportunities, there's so many opportunities in camp. So I think if a counselor sees that a kid is agile, moves really nicely, may suggest that kid, that we have a high ropes course or we have a climbing tower. And I think the kids discover these strengths that they had no idea that they had. I'm thinking about camps do plays, maybe they're Hebrew plays, and a kid may have his or her first opportunity to be in a play or to be on the tech crew, there's just so many opportunities. I think that those things then can carry over to other settings. But taking the academic piece out is amazing. And I think also it's counselors who really, they know the range of offerings, and they could make a shidduch and say, hey, you know what? You may not know this, but there's this really cool archery course, down the road. Give it a try. So I think camp is wonderful. I'm glad you asked about camp because it's really a great setting for that.
One of the things that it's been said, and sometimes it's said as a little bit of a joke. SAR is the school, it's like a camp. And when someone says that to me, I'm like, that's the highest compliment, because I think, and I actually would not be as as apologetic about the academics. There's plenty of academics. There's plenty of learning that if you learn through experience, if you can give a kid an experience where they can learn something, if you could do that in school the way they do that in camp, you can go to camp, you can learn Amanut, you can learn it in Hebrew, you could pick up a language, you could pick up skills. There are so many skills that you can learn through, and school and the traditional schooling is not the best way for many kids, or maybe for most kids, to do this. And we actually know that, we just don't know how to change it. So I think that figuring out how to bring some camp into school, that doesn't mean lowering standards, and it doesn't mean not having skills. It means figuring out ways to learn through doing and to learn through experiencing things. There is no better way to learn than that. And I think that camp's amazing at it, and I think that we have to figure out how to bring some of that into our schools.
One other piece about camp is that it's a possibility of something new. And also because if you are under the radar and you've gotten used to how you're presenting in school or presenting at home, and it's really hard to craft a new identity all of a sudden when everyone knows, you're X, you sit in the front right corner and you don't say anything, or whatever it is, then camp suddenly, in many cases is that chance to try on a new identity, and that alone can totally transform, forgetting all the other possibilities that are there in front of you.
Yeah, and I guess it's not just the skills and the areas that you could try out. It's also the social skills, and it's the opportunity to sort of have, hundreds of opportunities in real time. I mean, the classic example, boy's interested in a girl, and you decide how you're going to approach that situation. And you have a lot of opportunities to do it right or wrong, and to get corrected in real time by your bunkmates. I'll leave the rest of people's, experiences, imagination. But you have a lot of opportunities in a lot of settings to try out stuff and to get corrections.
I think that's from my other podcast, Intimate Judaism, actually.
One other thought is Dr. Phil Schneider, who's a speech therapist, guru, special person, holy person. I was on the way here. I actually was listening to a TED Talk that his son, Dr. Uri Schneider, gave. It was just a life-changing talk. Last week, I think he gave this talk. And he said that his father stresses the importance of giving children explicit, direct feedback and information. And he explained it's something like really telling them a strength that he notices. Wow, you're really organized. That's an incredible skill. Where do you use that in your life? Or I noticed, the example he gave that I just heard was you are really doing hard things, and hard things build muscle. We've heard that before, and that's a different way to look at something hard right away. I'm spoiled in the guidance role. It's easier for me than if I was teaching math. I only teach one class right now, which is public speaking, which is also a very broad venue to give feedback. But because I'm not tied to a subject, I have many more chances to say, I noticed that amazing, thing about you. Or, in your class, you're always the one to lift up a friend. You're always the first one to lend your notes. Like, how do you do that? That's not so easy for everyone. Where are you going to go with that in life? Or you're the fastest Googler, I've ever seen. You can always find the best sale for anyone, and you know how to do that. I have a chance to do it where I'm not tied to a subject, so I'm spoiled. I know it's easier for me. But wherever we can do that explicit direction or explicit feedback, that's so simple and yet so powerful. And parents can do that too, in terms of that.
Right. And just to add to that, I'm thinking about if a teacher is looking at it, there are some kids who are just phenomenal with building and blocks and making these elaborate structures. And you could either say, wow, this is really amazing, creative. This, have you ever thought about that people have careers doing these kinds of things? Or you could say, Norris, can I put that away and get your Gemara? And I think that it's really important to, I think sometimes the messaging is that these are good things. Gemara is good, building blocks is bad. And I think that for a whole separate topic, talking about the messaging around careers and what are good jobs, and some people could be amazing, plumbers and HVAC technicians and make a pretty nice parnasa. They don't only have to be the classic things that we point kids to. So I think it's all connected as well.
I want to stay with Dr. Yaish for a moment because we're talking about camps, but HASC is a very specific kind of camp. And I speak from experience of the father of two kids who one a counselor and one a lifeguard at HASC. My son didn't want to go to HASC, and somehow he was convinced to go, and it was life-changing. And he came back over and over again. It just simply changed the way he saw the world in a very, very positive way. That's a different kind of experience. Can you talk a little bit about how kids can discover new strengths, kids who may have fallen under the radar, through a program, HASC or something like that, a different kind of camp, a different kind of experience where they're doing things they never even thought about doing before?
Yeah, it's really actually cool to point out that I don't know if someone was quiet in their school or didn't get good grades. It's truly, I don't really know, because if you're stellar in this kind of behavioral way with campers and counselors, it's sort of not always equated to purely being socially strong or academically strong. I actually treated myself recently to a novel. I haven't read one in a long time. I haven't had the ability to get through one in a while. I don't know, in life busy. And it was called The Firefly Lane. It was a Kristen Hanna popular beach novel last summer. I think maybe it came out. And I really loved it. And I didn't think I would. It was kind of silly at the beginning, but then one person gave one line of feedback to this girl who was struggling. And she said, you could be an amazing news anchor one day. You just have that charm and that beauty and this strength and confidence. And at that time, being a female news anchor was like a path for someone who could make a difference in the world. The whole world would watch you on the news and you could make a difference. And then she spent the rest of her life from this one line, making her whole life about being a news anchor. So I think that there is a real almost obligation when you're in a school that's as rich and full of opportunity like an SAR, where they're trying to make it, that's not only about, it's not about, but it's not only about text learning. Can we make a connection for someone? Can we do something for someone that will show them a whole other set of skills that they could possibly have? It has to be genuine, though. It can't just be, you can't just throw these lines away and just say, oh, you'd make a great, whatever. We have to really think about it. But it's a camp like that shows it to you, obviously, because you're right in there, and then you're doing great, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know I'd be such a good counselor.
Yeah, and I have to tell you my own personal story, because it is that story that in 1984, I was on my way to work in the kitchen at Camp Ramah, New England, having never gone to camp before, just to have a fun summer with my friend. And I got a call on the dorm phone, if anybody knows what a dorm phone is from back in those days, and they had an opening in this thing called the TICFA program, and I said, what's that? And they explained it was the Disabilities Inclusion Program at Camp Ramah, and I had no experience, and really, the mentoring that I had led to 40 years working in this field. And that was not what 18-year-old Jewish boys did, become social workers and special education teachers, but it was really, there was something really powerful in that experience, and I was pretty good at it. And I think there was a lot of good feedback, and I think you said even just taking care of kids, and you never know. And I think that's really one of the points, is that you create these opportunities, you can really go very far.
Are there ways that we can allow parents, teachers, counselors to have a better sense of collaboration, to take the skills that they discover in, let's say, camp, or let's say in a school class that may not be noticed at home and no one knows about? And is there a way to then take that, move it forward, and talk to the parents, or the parents talk to the counselors or to the teachers to find a way to collaborate and say, you know what, my kid found something amazing at HASC, and now I want him to discover how to use that in some other context as well. So it's not just something which he does for 2 months in the summer, but something which he can do in other contexts. Or, for example, using your daughter's example with paper cuts. And next time my kid comes home asking for a knife, I won't be scared anymore. I think that's great. But to ask about, this kid likes paper cutting, where can I have that kid do it? How can I allow that collaboration to continue outside of the context in which they discovered it?
I think a lot of it has to do simply with, we go resources in terms of time, in terms of options, in terms of choices. And we have a program at school called Voice and Choice. So it's like, instead of a traditional, music class or art period, so there are 5 different things that you can do because you found the talent that you have, or we're going to help you find the talent that you have. Or we have when I was a little younger, we used to have running with a rabbi, so I could go for a run at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. And it was an amazing thing. You got kids who really, again, either through this program or somewhere else, like really were good at that, and they were able to. So you have to really push it into a schedule. You have to decide that it's worthwhile. And again, we in our school we actually have a lot of people who. I think this is pretty common generally. A lot of teachers spend time in camps in the summer, so you do have that natural overlap anywhere where they know what's going on in the camps and they know a lot of the same people if that's what's going on in your community. So I think there are, if it's an area of focus, it can be done.
I was speaking again in my little quest for, qualitative background for this podcast, that a parent said, do you know that I once sent a video of my child to the teacher from home because I knew they had no idea what my child even sounded like. Now, that's common in clinical treatment for selective mutism, let's say, where someone is really not talking except at home. And it would be really exciting for the teacher to even see what that kid looked like as a talking kid. What does that even look like? So I don't know if it was quite exactly that, but it was a kid who the parent really felt the school wasn't grasping her talents. They weren't also a school that wasn't, again, this is the parent's memory of it years later, but weren't, the parent asked for certain things like, could you jump up a level in class because she doesn't have the right social fit in her class, but the school said, no, academically she is not able to do this, which is something now schools are a little more fluid about because there's so much more focus on social, emotional wellness for the most part. But that was a powerful moment to think that the parents sent that video to school, and it made a big impact. The teachers were, just amazed to see what she was putting on a play at home, and so fun, and super excited. So yeah, in a dream world, we have like perfect parent-school collaboration, and everyone respects each other, and everyone, just believes the best of each other. And we try hard, and over years, let's say, over 4 years of high school, 8 years plus of elementary school, you can often hit that point. Like there is a point, or sometimes you're just like really happy to let go of each other. But when you're hitting that point, when there is a baseline ability to do that back and forth, where a school is humble enough to say we're missing something, or a family is sort of pushing a school, which is why we have so much more focus on social emotional, is because parents want more. Parents want the schools to do a lot, and teachers groan about this because time is stretched thin, and we can't always host an oneg every Friday night in Connect and have everyone in our house, even if we would want to, but because there's this push, there is a bit more of that ability to sort of take that school home camp feel. It is the trend of education nowadays, and I think, there's a lot of good to it because there is a way to be more than just a class.
Let me ask one question before Howard goes, because sometimes I wonder, as now a parent, sometimes a teacher will call up and say, I need some help over here. And I say, yeah, you need help, educational help. You need to be a better teacher. I don't say that, but that's what my wife and I are thinking. The problem is they want collaboration when in fact I'm saying, no, you should do your job. And I'm not sure, can you just help me, maybe parents here, understand better, when we talk about collaboration for the kids who aren't being noticed, when is collaboration necessary and when is it just, something maybe the teacher just needs to do a better job of reaching out for that kid. The teacher sometimes wants the parents to do more. I need you to work with the kids. Like, no, I think you need to be teaching better.
It's a hard thing. Again, I like it.
Not that that's ever happened to me.
Never. I'm sure never. I remember once a teacher called and said, I had the worst call with a parent ever. I called. I was really excited to share this concern I'm having, and the parent just said, I'm the parent, you're the teacher, you figure it out. I can't help you at all. You got to figure it out. That's not my job. I'm not paid to be a teacher. I have no idea what to tell you. That's your profession. I'm not a teacher. And they were like, oh, so obviously there's nicer ways, and words really matter is what I was also going to say tonight, because this is in some ways about quieter kids, and we also have to remember every word we say really matters. But I'd like to believe we're teaching teachers new language, and parents hopefully also, but there is an ultimate disconnect. They're really not in the school. They're really not in education. There's a famous speech that went around a couple of years ago where this man stood up at a teacher convention. Maybe you guys know this speech, and he said, in my fruit packing factory, we work on efficiency, and we cut the budget, and we do this and everything, and then, and showed how teachers could model his, fruit packing efficiency. And one little older teacher stood up and raised her hand and asked a question, and she said, Mr. So-and-so, children are not blueberries, she said to him. And kind of the whole premise was just this will not necessarily work in this setting. But I think with a little more humility on all sides, there's a way to say, like I said before, a teacher who's bringing their whole self into the classroom and is caring. I think the caring piece is the bottom line. Even my really grumpy teachers, let's say, who are like, I just want to teach my subject. I don't want to do all that other stuff. That kid has to figure out how to take better notes or be more organized, or, which is not too many of those teachers left around, but I'm saying the few that are, even you can get them back on board by saying, I know, it's true, but you also really care about the kid. And there's got to be some way we can hook in there a little bit better.
I mean, I think that I'm thinking about camp. That camp is such a great place for being collaborative with parents, because you only see the kids for 4 or 8 weeks, and as the parent, you're really the experts. Like tell us about your kid, things that we wouldn't see. And I think that in return, you could tell parents these things that you saw in this camp setting that they might never see. There's the collaboration. I think in the school setting, I'm thinking about the parent. I'm thinking being on the parent side and having parent-teacher conferences. And I think there were some parents, I think like us, who really value teachers and education, and we thought it was such a gift to be able to hear from the teachers what they were seeing. And there are other parents who just, they didn't want to come to the conferences. That was, and I think and it was so wonderful to be able to share the different perspectives, or sometimes similar ones. Like, wow, you saw that in class? Let me tell you what she's like at home, or vice versa. But to really put that out there, and it was really a wonderful conversation when that happened.
Two things that strike me. Number one, from the beginning of this conversation until now, everything has, it feels to me, been about just noticing people, just appreciating kids, and knowing that they have lives and interests and things that we can, that if we just listen first. That last we had a Shabbaton, 6th grade Shabbaton last Shabbos. I walked kids home. That was my entire job, was to walk the kids from school to their homes, and that was pretty much my responsibility for the Shabbos. And I got an email Monday morning from the teacher who said that the kid said the best part of the Shabbaton was walking home with being in Rabbi Krause's walking group. Now, I assure you, there was nothing going on. The conversation wasn't that stimulating, and perhaps we have to do something about our Shabbaton programming. But actually, it's remarkable, and also scary. Like, wow, that's what it takes to make a difference. But for the other 179 days a year, I didn't have that interaction with this kid. That didn't take very much, and what a difference it makes when you do something like that. I feel like that's where it begins, and that's where it ends. And the second thing I would just say is that I just had a conversation with an alumnus from our school. I don't know how many people here had the opportunity, for lack of a better word, to visit the Nova exhibit downtown. So one of the 3 people who brought the Nova exhibit to New York, one of them is an SIR alumnus. This guy was not much of a student, and what he did, he was always what he is, which is an entrepreneur, a very smart, creative person who was just looking for meaningful and interesting things to do. That's what he was as a kid, and that's who he is as a very successful business person, and now somebody who's had hundreds of thousands of people see what really needs to be seen, and a story that needs to be told. If we think that we know exactly where someone's going to be or what difference they're going to make, and if we think it's all going to happen in traditional classes, we're making a big mistake. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that at all ages. These kids are going to be, or have the potential to be, amazing, and we really need to make sure that, and I think that we do. I'm not criticizing anybody, because I think that for the most part we do, but we need to be reminded of that. The last thing I'll say is that, you reminded me of it when, this is probably my first or second year as principal, and there was a kid who we were really having a hard time with, and we called the mother in, and she simply said, "I'm not worried about him. Like, thank you very much for your feedback. He's going to be fine. I'm not worried." And we were like, "Oh, okay, what should we do for the next 12 years?" And she was like, "I don't know. I'm not, whatever you want, but I'm not worried about him." And she's completely right. So now we got to figure that out. We have to figure out what to do about it, because we have the kid for 12 years. But she's right.
Yeah, I mean, when you opened, Rabbi Krauss, to be honest, I had this moment, or like we're all under the radar in different ways. Like even like the really loud kids or the really smart kids, or everyone's got like that moment, like you said, that we all need, to be seen. And it's the art of living, right? To see the people around you and to really appreciate them. And I think that if anything anyone takes home from tonight would be that, to just try to be a little bit better at seeing and be seen. We appreciate it so much. A former student of mine was here tonight. She gave me this little notebook because she knew she'd see me to thank me for something. And I was just like, it doesn't happen too often as a teacher that you get like a little thank you notebook. Thank you. But we need that so much just for for ourselves, like that is how much more so for a kid who doesn't have all the experience and language and tools and other places we get feedback, from our workplace or loved ones, that they have just their one family they know and their one school day. So I just think that's important to hold on to from this night.
Howard, do you want to say any final words of conclusion about what to think about as we leave?
No, I think the same thing, that that I'm not sure how helpful this idea of radar is. I think that the message is that we have to just listen better and look better, and like I said, be a good detective and figure out where this kid shines. And I think everybody has an area where they shine. We'd have to just put in the time and figure that out.
And I just want to echo what Robert Krauss said a moment ago when he said that I'm not worried. And I think sometimes there are times when we should be worried, but to remember, no matter who the kid is, my good friend and my former co-rosh yeshiva, Rabbi Pesach Walicki, used to say about these 18-year-olds, he goes, the cement isn't dry. The cement isn't dry yet. There's a lot of room for growth, even when they're 10, 15, 20. Kids are late bloomers. Kids sometimes they'll discover strengths that they haven't seen until now. And as time goes on, we can just hope to cultivate them, do everything we can, listen, pay attention, notice, try to see what they need at any given time. And by so doing, hopefully we can bring out those superpowers. And if we don't, maybe we can at least give them the seeds to think about something later on in their life. Later on at some point, will start to sprout and allow them to feel that themselves, even if they're not ready for it earlier. Who knows? Who knows? We as teachers or our parents or educators or anybody, who knows what kinds of things we're planting just by talking to them. Maybe just a walk home from shul, walk home from the Shabbaton, might plant an idea which might change their lives. Okay, I want to wrap up now. I just want to once again thank Howard, Dr. Yaish, Robert Krauss. This was a really fascinating panel. I learned a lot. And if I can say one thing myself, I think just alerting people to the problem, allowing ourselves to realize that such a problem exists is, I'm not going to say it's half the battle, but it's the beginning of the battle. We don't notice them because we don't notice them. So at least talking about the fact that we don't notice them will help us pay attention to hopefully avoid the problem. I want to thank everybody. It's been a real honor to be with you tonight. And I want to thank Nancy and Larry once again, inspired by Alona. Really, this has been a pleasure and an honor, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, the Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. I hope you'll become a Jewish Coffee House patron on Patreon. Just click on the link in the description of this podcast, and you can get bonus episodes, Jewish Coffee House merch, and more. You'll get special episodes on all sorts of topics that are only available to subscribers, and you'll be helping Jewish Coffee House spread our message of a welcoming, intellectually engaged, and honest Orthodoxy. Just join Patreon. It's only a couple of dollars a month, and you can stop anytime, so join today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.